I am Grant Price, the product manager for Soder Wick brand of Desoldering Wick. Soder Wick, Desoldering Wick, Solder Braid, Desoldering Braid, all of these names refer to the same thing. It is a method of removing unwanted solder using flux and braided copper wire. It is commonly used to aid in the removal of faulty components, to correct solder bridging, or any other reason that you may want to remove solder. Wick is used by everyone from massive printed circuit board factories all the way to beginning hobbyists. It takes a little practice at first to get used to, but without much training, anyone can start removing unwanted solder quickly and easily. Wick is relatively inexpensive and simple to use compared to other methods of solder removal. It is also safer on components than vacuum desoldering devices, as less heat is applied to the component and the heat is applied for a shorter period of time. The commercial manufacturing of desoldering braid was originally invented and manufactured by Soder Wick brand in the 1960s. We have been perfecting the process and supplying customers with excellent product for over 5 decades now. Let's look at the steps in using soldering wick. Choose a width of wick that is similar in size to the glob of solder to be removed. Using wick with a significantly different width will make the solder removal more difficult. It is usually beneficial to keep several different widths at your workstation in order to be ready to desolder anything that you may encounter. Additionally, choose a tip for your soldering iron that is reasonably close in size to the wick that you are using. Next, you'll need to choose a wick with the appropriate flux type. For the fastest desoldering, choose a rosin-based flux. This wick has a part number starting with 80 or 50 in the solder wick line. For desoldering that does not require cleaning afterwards, choose a braid with no clean flux. This is wick with a part number starting with 60 in the solder wick line. If you have a requirement that you have to use a particular flux or that you use an organic flux, choose unfluxed wick. You'll need to add your own flux as you desolder in that case. Unfluxed wick has a part number that starts with 75 in the solder wick line. All the solder wick 5 and 10 foot lengths are wound onto static dissipative bobbins to eliminate any danger of a static charge being generated or transferred from you to the circuit board. Now for the actual desoldering. Step 1, place the wick over the solder to be removed, and then place the hot soldering iron over the braid. Step 2, place the tip at an angle that maximizes heat transfer through the braid to the solder. Use a clean tip that you have just tinned with fresh solder to maximize heat transfer. Heat will be moving up the copper, so be careful not to burn yourself. Step 3, apply slight pressure and wait for the solder to melt. Don't get in too big of a hurry at this point. Allow the tip to dwell long enough on the wick to heat the wick and then the solder on the other side. You'll see the wick begin to absorb the solder. Hold the tip and wick in place until the wicking action has stopped. Soder Wick brand is the fastest wick available for this process. Step 4, remove the wick and the braid at the same time. Removing the iron before removing the wick can cause the wick to become soldered to the board. If that does happen, reheat the braid so that you can remove it. Here's a tip. Adding a little extra flux to the joint before applying heat can make the job even easier and faster. This will also help to make an older spool of wick work like new. Once the wick is saturated with solder, trim it off and move it to a new piece of wick for your next desoldering. Sometimes there is a small amount of solder that is difficult to melt. This happens occasionally when solder is left in a through hole after removing the lead. Applying heat long enough to get down into the hole and melt the solder could damage the board. Instead, add a good amount of solder back to the area. Then, put the wick over the solder and remove it the same way as previously described. The additional solder acts as a heat bridge to the tiny amount of solder that was hard to reach, so it is all absorbed at one time. To remove solder from large areas, for example the pad after a BGA chip has been removed, first we're going to choose the largest solder wick available. 80-6-5 or 80-BGA-5 will both work well. Step 2 is to choose a tip with a broad surface area. A knife tip works well for this, but you can also use any tip with a broad surface area. Step 3 is to lay the braid all the way across the solder to be removed. Step 4 is to place the tip on one end of the braid. Move the tip slowly along the braid to melt and wick the solder as you move. Lift the wick as you move so that the braid doesn't adhere to the board. Thanks for watching. For more information, please go to chemtronics.com or email us at askchemtronics@chemtronics.com.